Good evening. The League of Women Voters of Pocatello and Pocatello Community Media welcomes you to this forum featuring the candidates running for legislative positions in District 28 and 29. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which seeks to promote the informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League neither supports nor opposes candidates for office at any level. Instead, it works to provide educational opportunities to the voting public to ensure a well-informed electorate. League is always open to new members, both men and women, and there are membership forms available should you be interested, and our membership chair is at the door, Tina Thurr. Our moderator tonight will be Margaret Gagnon, who will introduce our panel and describe the format for tonight's forum. Thank you.
Thank you. With us this evening are the candidates for 5 of the contested Idaho legislative races in Districts 28 and 29. One of the races is not contested, that's District 29 Position B, and our policy is to include only those that are. So over the next 2 hours, you will get to know candidates from both districts. From 7 to 7:55 p.m., we'll have District 28 candidates. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll start at 8 straight up to 8:55 p.m. to meet the candidates from District 29. The last 5 minutes, we'll have some comments from the League. And let's get started. The process is that each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves, their qualifications, and their goals for the office. After that, we will take, for the rest of the time, questions from the audience. And this year, the League Voting Services Committee has also prepared some questions. The audience members who have questions can write them on index cards. We have additional ones over at the door. And if you hold them up, a volunteer will come by, pick them up. If questions are, if we have more than one question on the same topic, you'll see volunteers will be rewriting them to consolidate them. If we have any questions that are illegible, or if they're directed to just one candidate, we do the same. So one change also, no phone-in questions tonight so that we can move right into the introductions. After that, candidates will have 1 minute to respond to each question. Each candidate will alternate who goes first, and if the candidate cares to give a rebuttal, they will have 30 seconds, if absolutely necessary, to do that. Hey. And so at the very end, each candidate will have 1 minute for closing remarks. We will begin now with the incumbent, State Senator Jim Guthrie, to my far right.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and thanks to the League of Women Voters. You always do such a great job of putting these on, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jim Guthrie, running for the Senate in District 28. And I guess if you were to look at my background, the common denominator is agriculture. I've been either owned a farm or lived on one since I was 5 years old, and I think, quite frankly, that's what helped me develop a good work ethic. Between that and good parents who made me develop that good work ethic. But I currently run a cow-calf operation in the Marsh Valley area and raise hay and grain. Some of my past experience, I worked for several years as a union journeyman carpenter. Worked for about 13 years at Ash Grove Cement doing a variety of jobs, and my time there included time as a union president and also time in management. I've been a business owner and have seen a broad cross-section of the employment sector. I have 3 kids and 7.8 grandchildren. Another one's due in December, so we're excited about that. And I'm fortunate that they all live close. That's something that not everybody has that luxury, and I'm really fortunate. My experience as far as elected official, I was on the school board at Marsh Valley School District 21 for about 6 years. I served as a county commissioner for 6 years. I served in the House of Representatives for 2 years and have completed 4 years service in the state Senate. I'm on the standing committees of Commerce, the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee, and I'm also vice chair of local government and taxation. On interim committees, I serve as the chairman of the Council on Indian Affairs, and I'm on the working group looking to find a solution for the GAP population. And I also serve on the CAT board, which is basically reinsurance for the indigent population. Other public service includes 15 years on the Board of Trustees at the Portneuf Medical Center. I see my time is about up. I look forward to your questions, and again, thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thank you. Next, we will meet Mike Saville.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm seeking District 28 seat. I'm not a Senate seat. I'm not a professional politician. I'm a retired businessman. I'm a veteran. I was employed at IBM for 32 years, and I worked here in Pocatello and Salt Lake, and I also did management in Los Angeles. After retiring from IBM, I worked for 13 years at a nonprofit faith-based financial company in Utah and built a home in McCammon in 2007. I am retired. I was born in Pocatello and raised in Grace on a farm, and also in Pocatello with my grandmother. I've been married to Rochelle Clark for 48 years. Rochelle graduated from Pocatello High School in 1965. I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in business from the University of Phoenix. I've been active in community service in local, state, and national elected offices. I am concerned about underfunded education and Idaho's 50th rank in per pupil spending, the teacher famine, where 2 teachers leave and only 1 is willing to be certified, and the 3-mill statewide tax levy removal in 2006 that decimated rural school funding. I'm concerned about the tax shifts to families and seniors with sales tax increases and vehicle registration increases, especially on battery-powered vehicles. Public land should stay public to ensure access for future generations. Some sales tax exemptions should be sunset that the Fair Share Idaho League of Women Voters identified, and Idaho should take the $720 million in federal funds annually for closing the gap for 78,000 low-wage Idahoans that include 5,400 veterans and their families and 2,800 Bannock County residents. I think my business career experience and financial knowledge can help solve some of the issues Idahoans face today if I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will meet the candidates for State Representative Position A in District 28. To my right, Randy Armstrong.
I'm grateful to be here tonight. It's not the most comfortable thing. I don't know that this is my strong suit in standing here introducing. I'd a lot rather just meet you personally, but nonetheless, I was born in Pocatello here. In fact, just like a block from here at the St. Anthony Hospital, and I was raised in Pocatello, went to high school here, graduated from high school in Marsh Valley, and then went to Idaho State University, graduated there, and then I went to work for an international investment company, which I had worked for 39 years. And in those 39 years, I handled a lot of money, a lot of investments, a lot of budgeting, a lot of finance, and so I felt really comfortable with that sort of background that I have. And I have moved back after I moved to Utah during part of my career, and then moved back to Idaho. I've lived here for about 18 years, and I just retired from my company, and so I've been passionate about politics and about everything that goes on in the political arena since I was really young, and just felt like I have time. I want to get involved. I'm concerned with the direction our country's going from with a situation with the overreach of the federal government with all the rules and regulations is concerning, and I'm concerned with the moral decline of the country, and I just think we all feel strongly about maintaining a traditional lifestyle here in Utah, and that's really why I chose to run.
Thank you. And also candidate for Position A, Steve Landon.
Thank you, Margaret, and League of Women Voters. I'm a lifelong resident of Idaho in the Pocatello-Chubbuck area. I'm retired from a 43-year career with the J.R. Simplot Company. While at Simplot, in addition to my work responsibilities, I served as president of the United Steelworkers Local 632. I've held offices on national and regional levels in 3 different international unions. I served as an international executive board member, international advisory board member, and as the president of 3 regional district councils representing workers in all 11 western states, covering more than 50,000 members. I've been appointed by the governor to the board of directors for the Idaho State Insurance Fund. I am the president of the Idaho chapter of the Alliance for Retired Americans. The ARA is an organization that is devoted to protecting and advancing the interests of seniors and is strongly committed to, among other issues, defending earned Social Security and Medicare benefits from attack. I am the chair of the Pocatello Simplot Credit Union Supervisory Committee, and I'm still an active member of the J.R. Simplot Education Council, supporting education in School District 25. This council has been responsible for over $100,000 in donations and grants to District 25 in the last 10 years. My wife Pam and I are proud parents and grandparents. Together we have raised, educated 5 children from preschool through secondary degrees and certifications in the state of Idaho. It is very important to me that we provide an affordable pathway for our children and grandchildren to get the education they need and the opportunity to find viable living wage opportunities that will let them remain in Idaho if they so choose. Education, the economy, and access to Idaho's public lands are issues that are very important. Idaho ranks last in education spending per student and 47th in per capita income. If we are going to improve both education and the economy, we need to elect people who are willing to look at innovative solutions and a willingness to invest in the future of Idaho. That is why I'm running for Idaho State Legislature in District 28 and why I'm asking you for your vote and your support on November 8th.
Thank you. We'll turn finally to position B candidates. First, Louis Archuleta.
Hi, my name is Louis Archuleta, and I'm running for the State Legislature, District 28, Seat B. I'm a lifelong Democrat, I'm an activist, and I'm a former space shuttle engineer. I have a rich heritage with Native American and Hispanic roots. I'm a member of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. I'm also a widower with 4 natural children, 3 stepkids, 22 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. I've always had a passion for education and believe it to be the foundation of any successful life. I was able to go beyond my drafting degree when I was made an engineer on the Space Shuttle project at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Because of my skills, outside of the box thinking, and leadership qualities, I was able to save the project at Vandenberg millions of dollars, as well as saved enough time to finish the project early, even though it was seriously behind schedule when I took over. I understand that someone graduating today may not be able to do what I did. I did all that without a degree. Students today need a solid K through 12 education and a forward-thinking college education to be successful. Send me to Boise and I will use the skills that allowed me to succeed on the Space Shuttle project to solving the problems with education in Idaho. In July this year, I took a trip around the state and met with all the tribes in Idaho. I learned that the tribes contribute $1.1 billion to our state's economy every year, and many of the same problems our other Idaho communities face. The trip taught me that I will be a representative for the whole state, not just my district. I promise you that if you send me to Boise, I will be accessible, active, and a thoughtful representative. Moreover, I will do interviews, write columns for the paper.
Thank you, Mr. Archuleta.
Thank you.
Our final introduction is incumbent Kelly Packer.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to the League of Women Voters. I truly appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion here and to hopefully field some of your questions and answer my positions on issues that are important to all of us. I appreciate the fact that the League of Women Voters is always working hard to make sure we have informed legislators. They're sending us information on a regular basis via email. They're also holding these forums so that we can visit with you and hopefully come together as a community and as a district to find the right solutions. As far as qualifications and why I'm running again, I actually have always found it very important to be a citizen and not just a resident of any place that I live, which includes not just going to the polls and voting, but being involved in the solutions in your communities and in your areas that you live. I've never sat on the sidelines very well, and so I've gotten actively involved in many different areas. I live in Marsh Valley and in McCammon, Idaho, and I actually have been the founder of the Education Foundation there, a beautification committee. I eventually ended up on the city council where I served for 5 years. I have just finished I'm finishing my 4th year as a legislator. And I've had a lot of wonderful opportunities to get to know our strengths and weaknesses here in Idaho, as well as my own personal strengths and weaknesses, and hopefully have been able to learn and grow and become a better representative for each of you. And I believe that that experience is something that can help all of us as we try to find the right solutions across the aisle with each other, as well as for each of the districts, not just the one that I represent. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to answering your questions.
Great, we'll get started with the first question. It will go to Mike Seville, and that is, what do you feel is the major issue facing the legislature in 2017, and how would you address it?
Well, the biggest thing, of course, is taking the federal dollars, the $720 million that's available that 31 other states have taken to close the gap. When I looked at that, I said, why aren't they taking the money? And it seems to be an ideology that says we're going to repeal Obamacare, so therefore we're not going to take the money. And by the way, part of the Republican platform is to repeal Obamacare. So if it's repealed, close the gap goes away. Every time I ask the question, I said, what are you going to replace it with? I don't get an answer. But it's still money, and it affects 78,000 people, 14,000 jobs. You take the money, and it's not right that we're taking federal money for bridges and roads and not to grow crops, and we're refusing $720 million a year. And that includes 2,800 people in Bannock County that could get affordable health care insurance with the subsidy here in Bannock County. So that's why I think it should be taken care of. Take the money while it's there. If it goes away, well, take the money now.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong.
Same question?
Yes, please.
I believe the number one issue is that's facing everybody individually is the excessive regulation that we're seeing from the state and from the federal government. And if you talk to individuals, you think if you're working, I work in the financial industry, and our regulation has just been massive. And I know I talk to people in agriculture, people in every industry, and the same thing is holding true, that regulation is just overwhelming and stifling the economy, and we need to do something about that. We need to hold the line on that in any way that we can.
Thank you. Mr. Landon.
I believe that the most important issue in the state of Idaho is education. We stand last in this country in per student funding. We have a severe teacher shortage, a severe teacher shortage in the state of Idaho. We struggle to fund building maintenance and fund the administration of our schools. Studies have proven that as education improves, everything improves with it. I firmly believe that if we create a system of education and a system of education funding that is fair for all, because the funding system that we have in place right now places the largest burden for funding our systems on the people who can afford it the least. So I think that if we create a system, if we can fix that system, create the funding system, put it into place, and create a method for education to improve, everything else will improve right along with it as far as our economy and everything else in this state is concerned.
Thank you. Mr. Archuleta.
I think the worst problem that our state is facing is the lack of funding for our education system. We're number 50. I don't like that. When I was a young man, we rated at about the middle of the pack. But ever since the last 25 years, Idaho has steadily declined in the rankings for school education. Money is the biggest problem with our education system. We are seriously underfunded, being the very last state. We're number 50, and that's not good. Better funding would actually lower our taxes by eliminating the county levies that the school levies that we've had to have. Out of the 110 school districts, 94 have school levies last year. That's way too much. Our legislature needs to be more responsive and responsible.
Thank you. Ms. Packer?
Thank you, Margaret. You know, I would agree that education is one of our most important issues that we face in the legislature. However, I think it's important that we also give accurate information. And yes, there are in some polls we're the 50th, but when you look at per capita, we're actually about 26th. And we have worked hard over the last 2 years to increase that spending, to bring it back up from pre-depression or pre-recession, I should say, periods. And we've worked hard, and we have a 5-year plan that's in place and that we're moving forward on, and I'm excited about that. I think that we also need to look, though, on a better solution for our healthcare system and find a way to effectively and affordably provide that health care. Right now, we're currently providing that regardless of what most people think. If they go into a hospital, they go into a facility, they're going to get service, and we're paying for it at an exorbitant amount. We need to rethink the way that we provide those services and find a better solution that would include helping those in the gap.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie?
Thank you. Certainly closing the gap is important, but as far as sustainability of the state and moving the state forward in a fashion that we want to see it, it's education. We have to continue our commitment towards education, which includes continued support financially for funding of the career ladder. I believe in supporting the dual enrollment opportunity where high school kids can earn up to 36 college credits. Any opportunities that we can have to acclimate students to online learning, I think, is a plus. And we recognize now that the workforce is global, and they've got to be able to compete on a global stage, and that includes improving our technology opportunities. And I think our curriculum has to become more flexible and an effort to match our kids to aptitude. And I think the biggest example out there right now is CTE, Career Technical Education. There's a lot of opportunities, and the workforce demands those kind of skills. So I think it's education.
Thank you. Do we have any rebuttals?
Did you ask for one or just any? I've heard multiples here.
Would you like to give a 30-second rebuttal?
Well, just, I kind of, not a rebuttal, but I'd like to say that I agree that education needs to be funded. And one of the things that happened in 2006 was when they cut the mill levy, the across-the-board property taxes by 3 mills. And that's, for example, in a $50,000 house, that's $150. But the thing is, in Marsh Valley, for example, prior to 2006, they were receiving $983,000, and today it's $32,000. And it's really causing a famine in the education system, and it really needs to be looked at.
Thank you. Any other?
I actually would like to just respond to what he just said. I think that open enrollment's hurting us worse than anything out there. When you have your students, when the funding goes with the student itself and your students are leaving your school district, you're going to have a huge decrease in the actual funding that happens in the school. And so I think it's a combination of things that has caused the decline in spending, or at least in the revenues in Marsh Valley, and one of those is open enrollment.
Just real quickly, I noticed my opponent was gesturing my way when he was doing his rebuttal. I was not in the legislature in 2006. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. This section. Oh,
Can I offer? The only thing I want to offer is I'm not a master of polls, and if there are polls out there that rank Idaho as number 26th as far as education is concerned, I've never seen them. The one number that I do want to concentrate on is approximately $6,700 per student. That's what Idaho spends per student, and it's ranked, and it is 49th or 50th in the nation. It is not 26th.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong, did you have?
I just wanted to say, I think I'm the only one here right now that is actually on the school board and have been for 9 years, so I can probably speak to that issue. And the reason I didn't mention education as being one of the number one priority is that the state constitution of Idaho demands or requires that the legislature fund education every year. That's the only thing that there's actually a constitutional clause that says we have to fund them. So they have a plan, a 5-year plan that they're working on. It's improved things significantly. So
thank you. Mr. Archuleta?
Education is the most important thing that a society can do for its young. Society is built of people, and people are trained to join that society in schools. And without those schools, we lose all of that social contact. We've got to do better at funding our education. and I do have plans on how to be able to do that.
Thank you. That is a perfect segue to the next question, which goes first to Mr. Armstrong. What can the legislature do to make sure the role of ISU is preserved and strengthened within our state's higher education system?
I'm sensitive to the needs of ISU just because I'm an alumnus of ISU and have been a bingo for my whole life, and so I'm obviously concerned about the viability of ISU. And I think the thing that we can do, I think this medical school is going to be very beneficial to ISU. It's going to help the national reputation of ISU, and I think we need to promote it more locally, the benefits of going to ISU and all the really great things that they have. And I think if the legislature recognizes how solid and strong ISU and what an impact it makes to our community, they'll continue to support it.
Thank you. Mr. Landon.
I think the Idaho State University has probably done more for southeastern Idaho than any other single entity. It's not only one of the largest employers in the area, it also is a leader in research, a leader in education, and a leader in innovation. I think that it's very critical that the legislature recognize the fact that Idaho State has those attributes and also has a location and I've heard it said, and I'd like to say I've heard it said that a town with a college is a college town. Pocatello is more of a town with a college rather than a college town. We need to involve Pocatello and this community a lot more in what's going on at Idaho State University, and then as a community send a message to the legislature that we expect them to uphold and support that university, and I think that's how we do it.
Thank you. Mr. Archuleta?
To support ISU better, I think we need a representative on the State Board of Education. Currently, there is nobody from this area on the State Board of Education. That would be one step to help ISU. Another is better funding. I'd also like to see a change in the administration at the university because the present administration has caused a lot of problems. We've had other problems at ISU, but they can be fixed. But again, the funding problem is the big one. Better funding for ISU would allow students to graduate without owing as much as they would for a small luxury car or a small home. That is an outrage. We need to cut the cost of college education.
Thank you. Ms. Packer?
Thank you. I think one of the most important things we can do, because I think ISU is a wonderful asset to our community. It's essential to this area and to the success of our children moving forward. And I think one of the main things we can do to help is to encourage children in post-secondary education opportunities. And I don't think that means just a degree. So often I think that we put a stigma around getting a four-year degree rather than looking at maybe what the student themselves would most benefit from. And that could be a four-year degree, it could be a doctorate degree, but it could also be a CTE opportunity. And I think that we need to get in the schools earlier and talk to them about the opportunities in front of them, talk to them about their interests, and find the best path forward to help them create a successful post-secondary education opportunity for themselves.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie?
Thank you. Certainly, we need to continue to help them build on their strengths. And their medical mission, which they're charged with, is certainly a good opportunity to continue furthering those kinds of degrees that they're offering at Idaho State. And I mentioned it earlier, but the career and technical education piece is truly a big an opportunity there. I was up to the college today, and they said by 2025 we'll need 49,000 employees in the career and technical education fields. And there's already great opportunities and great work going on with the private sector and private businesses as they are partnering with the university to determine what skills are needed. They're helping to even buy equipment to help them get trained to do the jobs that are needed in industry. Certainly some big opportunities there. The grants and the research, ISU does a great job of that. So a lot of positives that we can build on and help move forward for ISU.
Thank you. Mr. Seville?
Yes, by the way, I'm an alumnus too of ISU. In fact, when I was here working for IBM, ISU was my customer. I maintained the computer systems, and my wife's father was also in the computer center down there, and I've taken classes. But I noticed that enrollment is down. It seems like there's a shift in funding for education in the colleges, and it's not only here, but it's nationwide. The students are having to incur debt. When I was in the financial services, I was just appalled, $120,000 in student debt. How are you going to do that? It's a mortgage. And then trying to find a job that's been offshored with their skills that they received in college. So there's a lot of problems that need to be addressed, but one of the things is trying to get funding for education and being committed to it. And I think that's a primary mission that I would take up if I'm elected.
Thank you. We're at about the halfway mark with this panel, and we're through 2 questions. So unless there is a burning need to comment, I will move on to Mr. Landon. The next question is, what is your opinion of the work done by the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Committee, especially in relation to lowering costs, decreasing recidivism, and addressing the needs of persons with mental illnesses within the prison population?
You caught me with something, honestly, that I'm probably not going to give a very good answer to, but I'm going to try to move it forward a little bit with. I think that absolutely the things that has been done with the Hope and Recovery Center that's just now opened, or recently opened in the city of Pocatello, is going to do great things as far as helping those people who have had problems in the past, who have done time or whatever it's done, and they're trying to enter back into civilized society. So I think that the people that were involved in making that happen have done a great thing, because I think that one thing that we need to do with the part of the population that has those kinds of problems in the criminal justice system is that people have had problems with that type of activity in the past, and as we enter them back into society, that we've got to give them a path that offers them a reasonable amount of success. So that's pretty much that's all I can comment on at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Archuleta?
Just like Mr. Landon, I'm not familiar with that, but our society has a lot of problems with criminal activity, and a lot of it boils down to drugs. Meth, cocaine, heroin are a real scourge for all of our cities here in Idaho, and as well as the Indian reservations. There are ways and methods to deal with these problems, but they're going to take some changes in our society. For one thing, we can't not allow drugs to be considered to be a crime. Drug use is not a crime. Drug use is an illness and should be addressed as an illness and not crime. Sometimes the drug use leads to real crimes, but if we eliminate the drugs and the drug use, it will really help our society a lot.
Thank you. Ms. Packer?
I'm actually proud to say that I got to vote on that Justice Reinvestment Act. It was something that I think is a huge benefit to our state, and I'm excited to see some of the changes that we've recently made, which include decriminalizing some of the crimes that we currently were housing inmates for, or at least reducing the sentence from a felony to a misdemeanor. I think that's huge. I do think that we had people incarcerated that didn't belong there. Another focus that we have just started looking into more is the behavioral health aspect of things. That has unfortunately gone unchecked for a lot of years. We haven't addressed it the way we needed to, but we finally are. In fact, I'm proud to say that tomorrow morning I have a meeting with multiple sheriffs in our district, as well as some transportation units that are going to talk about how do we transport the mentally ill, who's responsible for them, where do we take them, how do we handle them, and how do we provide dignity and respect for a community that needs our help.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie?
Thank you. I was actually on the committee, the interim committee that looked at that for a year, and then they reshuffled some committees, and I ended up on public defense. So I do have some knowledge of what the effort was there. And one of the things they found out around the nation is that Idaho keeps folks in prison much longer than other states on average. And so they're looking at expediting the process to try to get those people processed and out, as well as better training for the probation and parole officers so that they can accommodate the needs of these folks that are transitioning out of incarceration. And also directing resources where they're needed to target the most, where the most bang for the buck would be on the offenders, and issuing sanctions immediately rather than down the road, and also rewards so that it kind of creates a different atmosphere and different climate. And I agree with Representative Packer. We've rewritten some of the code to make some of the felonies, and misdemeanors or whatever, and that's helped some too, because some folks that are in shouldn't be.
Thank you. Mr. Seville?
Yeah, I manned booths at the various venues around town, and I used to ask the young people if they would like to register to vote. And I was really surprised with the number of youngsters, 25 years and younger, who could not register to vote. And I didn't really, pry into their personal life, but it turned out that it was probably for smoking marijuana or having some sort of illicit drug. And I was really surprised how many. So I looked in to see how many people were incarcerated, and Idaho went from 5,000 to 8,000, and half of them folks are in there for drug use. I was also looked into, I said, we got, in the United States, there's 65 women in prison per 100,000 around the country, and in Idaho, it's 125 per 100,000. Now, I don't understand why it's so high or double than the rest of the country, but I think there's a problem there. And so we got to really look at these things, and I agree with Lewis. These are health issues, and incarcerating the war on drugs is a failure, and I think we need to do something like it, like surrounding states are doing, to stop a lot of this incarceration.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong?
You can tell from his comments, that's why I had to go out of state to find my wife. I'm kidding. My wife's from Idaho. Anyway, I just wanted to say I was so grateful to hear from Kelly and Jim, who are so knowledgeable on this. And I'm like Steve, I don't have a lot of experience, and whatever time I spent talking to about it would be a waste of your time, because that's not my area of understanding or expertise.
Thank you. Any additional? The next question will go first to Mr. Archuleta. Do you support or oppose having the state of Idaho assume ownership of federal public lands?
I absolutely oppose it for many reasons. The first reason is, as a tribal member, in 1868, the Shoshone and Bannock tribes had a treaty with the United States of America that that guaranteed unused lands for us to hunt and gather on. And by gathering, that means gathering all of the foodstuffs that are available in a forest. Also, we have modern-day sportsmen who would be shut out of the forest if we sold those, if the federal lands were turned over to the state. The state also doesn't have the funding to fight major forest fires, and due to the climate change, we are going to see more of that. I don't want to see closed gates on our national forests, and that will happen if Idaho gains federal land.
Thank you. Ms. Packer?
I don't think we have enough information yet to make that determination one way or the other, to be honest with you. I would love to see us take a small section where we are responsible for managing those lands to see if, one, we can afford it, two, we can do it better, and three, we can actually have a successful outcome. If the answer is yes, then I actually am completely in favor of it. I am not in favor of closing, however, national parks or any public lands to the current uses that we enjoy as Idahoans. Our way of life here is something that we all love. It's why we live here. And to have that changed is not something that I would approve of or help with. However, I do think that those forests and lands need to be better managed. They currently are not being taken care of, and we're seeing them go up in smoke, and that is not something that helps either the climate change or our state.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie?
That's a good question. I think you have to understand why the issue is before us. And you look at Idaho, and we're 63% federally owned. And that's frustrating to people. And you look at the PILT funding from the federal government, which is payment in lieu of taxes, and that's always under attack, that's always under pressure for the feds to take that away, and they have reduced that some. And some counties are over 90% federally owned. It creates a tremendous challenge for them to fund their needs. So that's why the issue is before us, is because of the high percentage of federal ownership. That said, I don't think on a large scale that that's a practical solution right now unless more information comes forward. It's going to be difficult for Idaho to transition to assume that management. I think if we're going to do anything, we would look at limited parcels as a pilot project effort, so to speak. But again, the big impediment to federal ownership and control is the regulations. We can't log, we can't do a lot of things that would help us and help our economy. So it's an issue that will continue to be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Seville?
Yeah, this issue keeps popping up over the decades as far as grabbing the federal land and put it in state control, which then will be sold to private parties. I want to remind everybody that we, the people, own the federal lands, and we have access to those lands. There's a place down in McCammon, I noticed, that says state property, no trespassing. It's a beautiful part of the Portneuf River, and it's locked up and it's owned by the state. It's right down there as you go into Lava, and I noticed that the other day. I don't think that the state has the money, nor do they have the expertise when it comes to fires, nor do we have the money to do that. I think it's primarily designed to take the federal lands, and eventually somebody, a realtor or something who's the governor, will buy the land at a cheap price to fund things. So I don't think it's good to take public lands and give it to the state.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong?
As Jim said, 63% of Idaho is owned by the federal government, and if you take a state like New York, is 0.006% of New York is owned by the federal government. And so you look at just as a matter of fairness, all of New York, they can be taxed, they can be developed, they can grow. I really think that the state of Idaho ought to look at that, but I'm also in agreement there's not a wholesale turn the whole thing over to Idaho. But just from a fairness and we have the ability to manage, we have the ability to generate income from all of this 63% of our state, obviously significantly more than half, and we ought to be able to use that. So we ought to take small portions, see how the state does, see how we manage it, see how we can handle that whole situation, and then work towards the whole thing over to the state.
Thank you. Mr. Landon?
I'm not sure I can respond to this in just 1 minute, but I'm going to give it a try. When Idaho was granted statehood, they were given about 3 million acres by the federal government given to them as public lands. They've already sold 40% of that. So there is some history there that says if they get control of public lands that they're going to sell it, or they're going to sell it to the highest bidder. When you mention other states that don't have near as much public land as Idaho does, you can talk about a state like Texas that probably only has 4 or 5% of public land. But if you don't know somebody, if you don't own the land, or if you don't have rights to land, you don't hunt, you don't fish, or you don't do the things that we do every day for free. You pay to do them. It's a pay-for-play system. Representative Packer is absolutely right. One of the reasons that we all live in this state, walk out the door and take a look around you. Look at the mountains. Look at everything that you can do within very few minutes of your home in Pocatello alone. Those are public lands. If you allow the state to control them, they've only got 2 ways to manage them. They'll either increase fees to use them or they'll sell them. We don't want either.
Thank you. Any additional? Yes,
Could I just offer one brief comment on the land out by McCammon that marked as state property and no trespassing? Because that was called to my attention. I checked into that, and the only time the state will post no trespassing on state lands is if there's a mining operation or something that has potential danger to the public. That is not their policy, and it's just rare exceptions where they will no trespass on state land.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Well, Jim, it's right there by where the railroad crossing is. I guess you're referring to that, and right at the intersection that goes into Lava, and that's good fishing waters. And I don't see any hazard, I don't see any mine or anything that's going to prevent that. It's the same as anything along the banks of the Portner River. So I don't know exactly. Maybe you're right. Maybe there is a hazard I'm not aware of. But it's a huge plot of land, and I don't know why. I was really surprised to see the sign that said state property, no trespassing. And I like to fish, and that was a great fishing spot.
Thank you. Any additional? Then this next question will go to Ms. Packer. How specifically should the legislature fulfill the constitutional requirement to provide a general, uniform, and thorough system of public education to all Idaho students?
Well, I think that's pretty self-explanatory right there. We have a specific responsibility to provide that education to all students to the best of our ability, while also, as a part of the Constitution, balancing our budget. And so we have a responsibility, a dual responsibility, to ensure that the revenues that come in are meted out in a responsible manner while still providing those other responsibilities that we have as a legislature. And I think that we've done that well over the last few years. Like I said, during the recession, things got tight for everybody, and education was the last area cut, and it was cut the very least. And then it was also the first restored, and we've worked and focused on trying to increase that spending over the last few years, with another 3 years already planned out for the 5-year plan that we've been working on.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie?
Well, certainly that's a good question. And a lot of us mentioned education as being a very important issue in the state. But right now, Idaho spends 48.5%, I believe, of the general fund dollars on K-12 education. And so we do have a significant interest in providing those needs. That said, a lot of districts around the state are doing supplemental levies. There's a lot of local tax money going in to support the schools as well. I think that's why Governor Otter did the task force to identify what we need to do to move education forward. We've made a commitment in the career ladder. The funding for education has been up dramatically in the last few years, and certainly work left to do. So,
Thank you. Mr. Seville?
Yes, education is really the key to economic development. And I use the example of having worked in the corporate world. Whenever a corporation wants to move to Idaho or any place, they always look and see what the environment is like, and especially education. Because 25% of all the employees they're going to bring are going to start that business. And when they see $6,700 per pupil at 50th in the nation, when Mississippi is $8,100 and Wyoming's $15,000 per pupil, they probably say, well, let's look around a little bit. So it's important. It all ties into education. You know, and teachers have mortgages and they need pay. When you have 2 teachers that are quitting and only one recertifies, it's a funding problem. And the 2006 law that was passed decimated education. And it really has to be looked at. It's a across-the-board thing. And these supplemental levies that are occurring in communities, the seniors aren't going to vote for it, and neither are other people that have a tax issue. So I think that really needs to be addressed. We've got to increase funding in education in Idaho and keep that commitment to our children.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong?
For the last 3 years in our district, we had a rainy day fund, fortunately, but we have spent more money than we've taken in. We're slowly eroding the rainy day fund, and so we obviously are getting near a crisis situation. It's steadily improving, so we obviously need to look at funding for education, but we also have the responsibility to balance our budget in Idaho, and we can't. There's a lot of other departments and a lot of other people who need to be paid, and so it has to be looked at carefully, and I think the legislature is doing a really good job at trying to manage that whole issue.
Thank you. Mr. Landon?
I interpret that constitutional amendment to mean that you're going to provide an education, and it's going to be an equal education for all. And I think part of the problem that we have in the state of Idaho right now is that when we start to run out of funding, like Randy has said, that they're reaching a crisis point in their district, you try to fulfill that or cover that with bond levies, with bonds or with levy elections in order to raise more money, which tells me that at some point in time, those districts or those areas that can afford to pass the levies or pass the bonds are going to be able to afford to fund education. Those places that can't are not going to be able to fund education. And what do we do for them? That's where the state has to meet its requirement to step in and raise the funding and make sure that there's adequate funding there for every student in the state of Idaho, and not just those students that live in areas that can afford it.
Thank you. Mr. Archuleta?
Idaho education has done an incredible job with the few resources that the state legislature has given them to work with. Idaho funding right now is still below 2007 levels. That is not acceptable. We need to really increase our education funding and spending to adequately prepare our students for the future. The way we're doing it now just lets us fall further and further behind. I look at the Idaho State Legislature as being the culprit in education because they deliberately underfunded our schooling for the last decade and will continue to do so as long as they're in power. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Any additional?
I would like to make, just correct one thing that was recently said. I actually just spoke with a member of JFAC about our education spending and wanted to make sure that I was giving accurate information on this. You know, if you look at all of the line items together as a whole, we actually have increased beyond the 2007 level. In fact, we've also exceeded the 2009 and 2010 levels because what they've done is reorganize some of those line items and change them and had some certain items be put as...
Thank you. Any additional?
Yeah, I looked at the Idaho Education Association and whatever it's called, and they said that education has been cut since 2000 by 25%, and that's funding. And so in order to bring it back, you got to go back up about 33%, and if you add in inflation to it, it's probably 50% since that time. So really battering around numbers, they're starving. There's a famine. And so we really have to address that issue. We have to spread it around a little bit. Going to the individual school districts and asking for bond increases is not going to happen in the poor rural areas.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Then we will move to the summation, and we'll start with Senator Guthrie. If you could share one last minute of closing remarks, we'll go ahead and...
Well, thank you, Margaret, and thank you again for holding the forum. I always appreciate these. It's so well done. If I am sent back to the Idaho Senate, I will continue to advocate for limited government and limited regulation. I believe we should have tax policy that's fair, consistent, and predictable. I'm a strong advocate for personal and private property rights and our state sovereignty and states' rights. I believe water is going to be a big issue, and will advocate for the effective and wise management of our water. Again, I believe in a strong education system and will continue to fight for increased funding for education. And overall, I believe that in policy, fairness is critical. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I would appreciate your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Seville?
Yes, when I was asked to run for office, and I recently retired, and I really thought, this thing with education really bothers me, and also not taking $720 million a year that's, from the federal government for crying out loud. And so I thought that maybe my skills that I have from business, and maybe some of the expertise that I've developed in financial planning, that I can make a difference, and also negotiate. I mean, these are nice guys. but we've got to get on the same page if we're going to solve some of these problems. It can't be an ideological problem, or, we're not going to do it because we're going to repeal Obamacare. No, let's get it. Let's take the money and then worry about it later if it's repealed. But the point is that I feel very passionate about these issues, and I want to make a difference, and I'm committed to it, and I'm doing it for the children, because I was given, when I was poor as a kid growing up, education made the difference to my life. And there's a lot of children out there that need help. And I think that with extra funding and extra resources, the teachers can do their job to make that happen for those kids.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong?
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here tonight. I just want to say that we all love the government. We're grateful that the government protects our life, but I don't think any of us like the government ordering us around and telling us what to do. And I think that the role of the government's becoming more and more that, telling us what we can and can't do. And I think we need to hold the line on that. I think we need to be fair in all the things we do, but we also need a common sense approach to all the matters of the state. And I think that if we are careful with what we do, then we can all become a much stronger state. Thank you for attending and being here.
Thank you. Mr. Landon?
Thank you. As I said before, I have a union background. I've spent most of my life fighting for fairness and opportunity for the people that I represented. What I've seen in Idaho is not fair, and it doesn't provide opportunity. And I think that hurts our families, it hurts our communities, it hurts our children, and it hurts our businesses. 20 years of less funding for education, less opportunity in living wage jobs, and less investment in infrastructure needs to stop. And again, that's why I'm asking your support and your vote November 28th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Archuleta?
Again, education is the most important thing that we can do for our society. And when we do that badly, it reflects on what happens here. And it has. Better education, better funding, better Idaho. That's all there is. We need to increase our funding for education. Once we have our populace well educated, then the jobs will come. And when we have good jobs, we'll have a better society. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Packer?
Thank you. Thank you again for being here tonight, and for to the League of Women Voters for organizing this. I really appreciate the opportunity to have been here and to listen to each of the ideas. I think one of the things that I learned the most when I went to the legislature that first year is that I wasn't near as smart as I thought I was in my armchair, that there were a lot of things that I didn't know, including all of the 105 ideas that were going to be up in Boise when I got there to address every single issue, and I was going to be one of those 105. And so one of the things I committed to early on is trying to understand both sides of the issue, trying to find the right solution to move forward, which hasn't always been the most popular solution necessarily, but I have vowed to do the right thing. I'm the representative of District 28 because I want to find answers. I want to find solutions to improve the circumstances we're in, and the things that I bring forth don't always make it to the end of the road, but at least I've tried, and at least I've been honest in my effort, and I will continue to do that as your representative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panel. We'll take a break and let District 29 candidates make their way up. The candidates for Legislative District 29 seats, we will begin with 2-minute introductions, starting with the candidate to my far right. For Office of State Senator, we have Sierra Idaho Lorax Carta.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here. Those of you who don't know much about what I am or who I am a community activist. I'm not a politician. I believe that people should have people represent you who have substance. And so I'm an educator, longtime educator, with multiple background in sciences, and I'm here to serve the people of Pocatello. And with that, I want to give you a little demonstration of my introduction. This is a mask. It is basically given by the City of Pocatello workers now and people in the state, but it is not adequate for the materials in Bannock County in terms of their contamination. This is a better one. It's got a little bit better quality, but it's just like our politics here in our community, in our region sometimes. It's not effective. This is what you really need to live in Pocatello Valley, because our uranium readings here are as high as Fukushima. And if you don't know, and I need to tell you now, because our National Forest Service was, by accident, put the uranium materials out through our Caribou National Forest, as far as we know. So this is a real problem for our economy, for issues of state-owned versus publicly owned or federally owned. So those are the kinds of issues that I am here to share, to always answer questions. I am a reporter. It would be nice to have a reporter, videographer, and writer in the Idaho legislature to keep you informed. Of course, they might ban me or make a lot of new rules if I actually allowed to serve you for you. But anyways, that's my background. Extensive education in many fields. Biologist, geologist. I can go on and on. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And next we have Tom Katzlamides.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Katzlamides. I'm a Pocatello native, born here in the 60s. Family was here in Pocatello since the 1800s. My grandfather came in 1904, and tonight I have a few members of my lovely family here as well. I'm thrilled that the League of Women Voters invited me. In fact, I sat next to one of the longtime members, Ms. Carol Roberts, on the election night for the primary. And 44 years ago, I was at her house for a birthday party with her son, Carson, and we were classmates. And I like to say I was at ISU twice. I was at ISU in the 1970s as a student at the campus school in elementary, and there again after I graduated from Pokie High in the 1980s. So been around for a long time, been away for a couple of times for other parts of school, and it is a sincere honor and pleasure to be back in Idaho again. And I love Pocatello, I love Idaho, and Catherine is here. We met more than 17 years ago, and after we were together for 1 year, I brought her to Idaho, and she absolutely loved it and moved here a few years ago, so I'm thankful for that as well. I'm also thankful for my opponents tonight, Mr. Sierra and Mr. Nye, and we are thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to serve you. My educational background, I have a degree in finance, a degree in economics, a law degree, work as an attorney. I also develop property, run farm and ranch operations, and very sensitive to the local economy. And also a Bengal booster, and I love ISU. So thank you.
Thank you. And the final candidate in District 29 Senate race, Mr. Mark Nye.
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks to the League. I'm seeking re-election to the legislature, and I'm your current state representative. I'd like to continue to be your voice in the Senate. Public service has always been important to me and my wife Eva, who's a long-term public servant in Pocatello. I've lived in Pokie forever. My family's here, probably 1850s, but we're here for now. I've been legal counsel at ISU. I've helped grow my law firm. I was elected president of the Idaho State Bar by the lawyers and judges of Idaho. As many of you know, I was chairman of the ISU Foundation that raised millions that resulted in the Performing Arts Center. I'm proud of that. The issues are education, more respect for our teachers, for the economy, and jobs. I've been endorsed by labor, I've been endorsed by management, realtors, conservation, and the Idaho Education Association, and I'm proud of that. Well, let me tell you a story about campaigning and what really affected me. I stopped by the Community Action Center and was sort of asking around how things are going, and I ran into the gentleman that runs the veterans program there, and he said, I just said, what's up? What do you need? And he said, Mark, I don't have time to talk to you right now. I've got 12 homeless vets. We got to find homing rooms for tonight. That's what it's all about. I can make a difference. I have made a difference. I stand for those who are needy. I stand for equal rights and doing what's right for Pocatello. And I ask to continue to be a voice to serve as your senator. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for candidates for state representative position A, we have David H. McGuire.
Thank you. I'm David McGuire, and I consider myself to be incredibly lucky. And one of the reasons I consider that is because when I look around this room, I bet you I know more than half of the people here, and I've gotten to know some of you pretty darn well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what my qualifications are. I want to talk about something else that I think is important. I want to talk about the League of Women Voters, and I want to thank them for their efforts in conducting this forum. But I also want to thank them because they are in the business as bipartisans, nonpartisans, trying to improve things for the state of Idaho. And one of the things that the League of Women Voters have done is to put up, or to form an initiative, the Fair Share Idaho Initiative, something that we all ought to be familiar with and we all ought to study very carefully, because it has several important factors that I think help all of us understand what this legislative discussion is about, at least in large part. They're talking about the elimination of sales tax for 22 people that enjoy special exemptions from sales tax in the state of Idaho. So the first issue that comes up is when we're talking tax fairness. Let's take a look and carefully vet the taxes that we have to make sure that people are paying their fair share of the taxes that the state is or is not collecting. You know, if the League of Women Voters are right, there's $424 million in taxes that could be collected. If you vet those tax exemptions carefully and decide which ones are no longer appropriate, we get rid of them, we raise an awful lot of money. And you know what the League of Women Voters is asking for? They want the money to go to education. In Idaho, the biggest expenditure by far over everything else that we have is education. And where is our biggest problem? Well, I'll tell you where I think it's specifically a problem: teachers' salaries. You probably saw the op-ed piece by Sherry Ibarra about teachers retiring and teachers leaving, and how we take care of that problem, not just in 10 or 15 years, but right now.
Thank you. And finally, we have Mr. Dustin Whitney Manwaring.
Thank you, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and all of you for attending tonight. It's my pleasure to be here and to witness this democracy in action. I was born and raised in this community. In Blackfoot, I grew up, and my mom's family is primarily from here in Pocatello, and my dad's family is primarily from the Blackfoot area. Grew up on a small farm in Blackfoot and was raised by the good old-fashioned Idaho values. And that's why I eventually, after going to undergraduate school and law school, came back and decided to start my practice here in Idaho. I primarily practice business law, and I've grown that practice in the last 6 years quite successfully. I would like to preserve the values that I've been raised upon, the conservative values of being fiscally responsible and protecting family values in Idaho. Education is an important one, and we're going to probably talk a lot about that tonight. And that's going to be a priority for me as I want to grow my family. That's one of the things that's #1 priority for me. I think that the community, not just here in Pocatello, but around our state and country, are ready for a new generation of leadership. I am one that is ready to step forward and be a leader in that new generation. And one of the things that I think that will guide my principles when I'm over in Boise is diligence. I will be someone that looks at all sides of every issue before I make a decision and takes the community's input and tries to really understand the decisions that I'm making, and then come back and be able to have conversations with you so you feel good about the decisions that are being voted upon in Boise. My priorities will be the same priorities that the rest of the legislature is. We're going to be dealing with the gap coverage with education. We're going to be dealing with CTE issues and infrastructure, and that's what my priorities will be when we get elected and go over to Boise. Thank you.
Thank you. This first question will go to Mr. Katsilometes, and you will have 1 minute. The question is, what do you feel is the major issue facing the legislature in 2017, and how would you address it?
I would have to agree with the District 29 candidates that spoke earlier, and I think one of the biggest issues facing all Idahoans right now, and probably the nation, is healthcare costs. And we do have a funding shortage for a lot of folks who can't afford insurance. And unfortunately, for folks that have signed on to some of the new policies, they weren't able to keep the doctor they wanted. They weren't able to keep the plan they wanted. Their premiums are going up. Their deductibles are going up. This is something we've heard recently in national news. And if you recently got a notice in your mail from your carrier, you have seen this yourself. We're going to have some trouble. We're going to have some trouble, and we need to address it right away. One of those ways we can do that is to have a more robust exchange. I don't know if a state exchange is the best way to go, if we should have a private partnership and have private carriers more involved.
Thank you. Mr. Nye?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. What is the major issue facing the legislature in 2017, and how would you address it?
I think it's education, K-12 and beyond. There's also evidence now that age 3 and above is really important to have kids read to. Besides having a constitutional requirement to fully fund K through 12, people forget that the legislature was sued for not doing that. The Supreme Court of Idaho said that the legislature had failed in adequately funding kindergarten through 12th grade. Nothing has happened that much since. Teachers are leaving, and we've got to do better. I look at also higher education. ISU is, I'm not going to say teetering, but it needs funding. For a kid to graduate with $30,000 in debt
Thank
is
you.
not right, so thank you.
Mr. McGuire?
Thank you. It is funding for education. I've had a chance to go talk to some of the principals at the schools, and I've had a chance to talk to a number of the teachers in our schools. And over the last 25 or 30 years, our legislature has not treated teachers fairly. They have really marginalized them, quite frankly. I don't think that they have shown much respect for them, although they give them lip service that they have. But they haven't adequately funded our schools. They have not adequately paid for teacher salaries. And if you read and talk to people in education, they will tell you that the most pressing problem right now is the fact that we are losing teachers about 2 to 1 for the ones that are replacing them. And the ones that are coming into a system where they don't get paid a decent salary. We've got to raise teacher salaries. That gives us a chance to get high-quality people in our classrooms, and that's essential. This idea that we can muddle along and, well, get a substitute here and there, or get somebody who's not well qualified to stand in the classroom, two of the most important places in education, the classroom and the home.
Thank you. Mr. Manwaring?
Thank you. So I think there's going to be 3 primary focuses in this next legislative session. We're going to have a lot of focus from the media and other groups around the state pushing to close the gap. That's going to be one of the priorities. The second one is going to be the CTE that has been discussed in the earlier panel, and funding for career technical education and more high school ways for high school students to get college credits. That's going to be a focus and around spending those dollars, and also we're changing from No Child Left Behind to Every Child Succeeds, and so we have a lot to do in the legislature on that. And the last one's going to be infrastructure. We have to fix our roads and bridges, and that's going to be a priority this year. And there's going to be a lot of discussion about gas tax and how that affects infrastructure spending. So those are the three issues that I think are going to be the most pressing in this next legislative session.
Thank you. Mr. Carta?
I look at it as three-pronged. One, of course, is safety, which I addressed a little bit. Safety at all levels in this community and the state of Idaho has to be addressed, from health issues and how we proceed in lifestyles. Also, in terms of health, blood disease. This is something that affects a large area of this state, and nobody even wants to even learn about it, how it affects our mental capacities, our depression, things like that. It's heavy metal poisoning with uranium elements in it. I mean, that's what it is. That's blood disease, okay? You breathe it, being in the Pocatello Valley. Education, I'm very important about education. The community school here in Pocatello is a project learning school. That's what I did in the world partly, is I give lectures and taught, and people needed help in project learning education. Yes, it's not the public sector that usually entertained it. It is the community schools or the charter schools. It's a very good way to teach your kids.
Thank you. Do we have any additional comments? Then we will move to the next question. We'll start with Mr. Nye. What can the legislature do to make sure that the role of ISU is preserved and strengthened within our state's higher education system?
Has the clock started?
Yes, it has.
One of the ways we raised private money was telling the donors that this legislature had gone from funding 90% of the operation up at ISU to about 30%, and it hasn't gotten any better. In other words, they've cut millions of dollars from Boise that comes here. We managed to get an extra $1 million for ISU, but the difference has been made up by charging extra tuition. The legislature has to step up and do what's right, and I've been a pretty good voice already helping ISU so they can buy locally rather than having to go through Boise to buy a light bulb or a chair. So we'll get there, but we have to fight for it.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire?
Well, Idaho State University has been designated as the facility charged with the responsibility of providing healthcare services to the state of Idaho. Nursing, the doctor's program, now the ICOM Medical School in Boise. But it always seems like there's a scramble for those dollars, whether it's the University of Idaho or Boise State or other entities that are trying to get their fair share. We have to continue to assert our right to be the lead university for providing healthcare services for this state, and take the lead and demand that we receive the funding that we need to adequately provide those services. Now, that's a lot of legislative wrangling that goes on, and that's why a representative that fights hard for that is important. I think we can make that work.
Thank you. Mr. Manwaring?
So one of the things I think can be the most effective to preserve ISU is sending someone over that's in the majority in the legislature. So electing me will be one of the first things that can be effective to preserve ISU. And I don't think that we need to assert and demand our position over there. I think that we have effective leadership from Pocatello, and we establish a reputation that is respected. We will get funding, and ISU will continue to have a good reputation around our state.
Thank you. Mr. Carta?
Yes, ISU. It's one of my automatas too. And I'm very concerned about ISU. I was here the first time I was in this community. ISU has lost a lot of money because of do not tell and cover up. The Saudis, the Kuwaitis, they don't want their kids going to a school that has uranium materials all on four sides and throughout a community. They turned in by their own students. And we got the medical facility that everybody thought well of. Didn't come here because doctors don't want to come here. There's a lot of doctors who know about the issues here. They don't want to be here. There's a lot of people here. at issues. If ISU doesn't come clean, and they all know it, everybody at ISU and every department and research and president on down knows about the problems here, but does not engage in cleanup efforts or the monies that I came with here, the billions of dollars that I testified for cleanup for this community, to save this community. But I'm not here to save you.
Thank you.
I'm only here to work with you.
Mr. Katsilometes?
I think one of the first issues we ought to do is try to see if we can get the medical school in Pocatello. I think we still have an opportunity to do that. And one of the things I worked on for a number of years, and people know this who have talked to me about it, is trying to get a VA super clinic built at the old Bannock Hospital. And one of the things that really prompted me to get into this race is I heard it was being torn down. And I stopped over in the legislature and talked to both Mr. Nye and Mr. Lacey and a few other folks in the legislature and say, we've got to do something about this. It would be an easy transition from a VA super clinic to a medical school. And it could have been done. We still have a chance to do that. The biggest cost component for running a medical school is salaries. And that would be provided by the federal government to take care of veterans and have medical staff there for training and make an easy transition to a medical school. It can still be done. And I will fight for that in the legislature for you.
Thank you. Mr. Nye?
Have I covered this?
Do you have additional comments?
Well, you brought up Roy Lacey, and I don't see Roy here, but we should give him Senator Lacey a real tribute for his service. And Lane's here, and she knows. And I would like to say that Roy has agreed to be my chairman, and I'm real proud of that. So thank you for commenting on Roy Lacey.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire, any additional comments? Mr. Van Waring? We will move on then to the next question, which will go first to Mr. McGuire. With regard to criminal justice reinvestment efforts, how can the legislature lower costs, decrease recidivism, and address the needs of people with mental illnesses within the prison population?
Well, you've got to remember that the Reform Act we're talking about comes on the heels of about 20 or 25 years where a Republican-dominated legislature, none of whom have a lot of history in this room, so I don't want to suggest it's their fault, had the attitude that if you committed a crime, they put you in jail and they threw away the key. And we wound up with incredible populations. Remember that? We even had a private prison system at one point in time that was in the press. I've talked to Laura Nielsen. I've talked to Judge Stephen Dunn. I've talked to a very well-known person here, Judge Brian Murray. And what we've got to have is services on a local basis, adequately funded to help people, not just mental health. That's a major problem with people that are oftentimes in jail, not because they're criminals, but because they have mental illness, and young kids with addictions. And that's a major problem, too. You don't put those kids in jail. You give them very close supervision.
Thank you.
Okay,
Mr. Van Waring?
So we have a significant problem with overpopulated prisons and recidivism throughout our country. Idaho's not unique in that. And there has been some unique things done in this legislation that is mentioned to educate, to provide further education for probation officers and people that are dealing with our youth and those that are in our system. And I think I will at least agree with what Mr. McGuire said with keeping things local. I think every time we can keep a decision local, and education is key on trying to prevent people from going back into our prison systems. And every time we can have local control and helping to educate our population and preventing them from going back into the system, it's been a success. So on the state level, I would look for ways to keep that local control here in Pocatello. And one of the things we can also do is make sure we're not giving up our state control to the federal government on making decisions on our mental health.
Thank you. Mr. Carta?
The prisons are in jail populations. They come out of depressed neighborhoods. People know that anywhere in the country where you live in cities, depressed neighborhoods, high crime rate, high drug use. And it's no different in Pocatello, where unemployment for a lot of people is really lacking here. And people are depressed, not only from the Luds disease I mentioned, but other things. Having a future here is not great. Many people at ISU, students, say, what can I do? I have a future here in Idaho. And that's a depressing thing. Even the refugee program didn't come to Pocatello because there's no jobs for it to be successful in any way. So I went to Twin Falls. Those where the jobs are. Why aren't the jobs here? Well, there's a lot of people. We've been killing this community for a very long time. The boom days of FMC Corporation is over. The phosphates has destroyed our environment here, and if we don't clean up with the money that's available, like every other package, you'll lose it. And then you'll never have it. And people are going for buyout now.
Thank you, Mr. Katsoulias.
I think the entire criminal justice system is premised on the idea if someone does something bad, we're going to punish them and put them in a jail or prison and warehouse them. There aren't really good programs to keep people out of prisons. One of the best programs is a job and being productive in your society and contributing. And we've failed to have these opportunities. I worked in Fort Hall for a number of years. I was a court administrator there, and they face the same problems there as anywhere else. There's a lack of opportunity for folks to be involved in their community and working and being productive, and instead they turn to certain things, drugs, alcohol. This is happening everywhere, and we put them in prison. More disruptive to their families, so on and so forth. It provides costs. I've seen a few things that are vast improvements on the way. Drug courts, diversionary courts, having people outside of the jail system.
Thank you. Mr. Nye?
Thanks, Margaret. I was appointed by the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader, and I'm a member of the Idaho Criminal Justice Commission. We meet about every 2 months. On that committee are, as a member of the Idaho Supreme Court, the prosecutor's representative, the public defender, head of the prisons, and others. We have already passed legislation to reduce some of the penalties and the automatic mandatory sentences. And it's just scratching the surface. The consensus is prevention through pretrial diversion, through extra probation, drug court, and then after. I'll tell you quickly, I went to the women's prison here. There are 300 women, only 15 are violent. Idaho has the lowest rate of violent crime in the West and the highest rate of incarceration.
Thank you. Any additional comments? The next question will go first to Mr. Manwaring. Should Common Core be kept as a part of Idaho education?
No, and I think it's been shown to fail in almost every aspect as it's trying to been implemented. And as I mentioned in my opening, or at least in one of my answers, we're shifting from No Child Left Behind to Every Student Succeeds, and the state is under the process right now of implementing those new guidelines. And when I've talked to local teachers here in Pocatello, I've heard firsthand how they don't believe that it's been effective. And so I think that it should not be implemented and should be repealed, and it hasn't been effective.
Thank you. Mr. Carta?
Well, I think you should have stayed up later and listened to some of the stories with Howard, like me and him have talked about. Do not tell policies and contamination in this area here in this state. But I don't know. Throw a quick question at me, please, one more time.
Sure. Should Idaho retain Common Core as part of its education?
Well, as I addressed a little bit, Common Core has its problems. It's like science was the last one to have standards because science keeps changing, it's growing, it's too large. That's why, what did I say before? Project learning. People, what do you remember in school? Most people remember the project they did when they had a teacher that did it, because that's how we learn. Building things, making things, technical education, or any science or art project. It's how you should learn. Learn about that. Learn how to apply it, learn how to use it. Charter schools do because they have the ability and leeway to do it. Public schools are often confined. The core curriculum has
Thank you, Mr. Carta. Mr. Katsoulias?
I'd have to agree with both Mr. Manwaring and Mr. Carta that we ought to scrap Common Core and bring local control back to our school system, both in public schools and, of course, the private schools. And one of those aspects is for local control is setting the curriculum and the standards and the testing. And unfortunately, Common Core is not geared to making people a success when they get out of school. It's, again, like Mr. Manwaring said, first we had No Child Left Behind. Common Core, I think, is even worse. Let's go back to some of the basics, and then let's get back to some of the things that we really need, like Mr. Carter mentioned, science training and technical training and arts training, some of the things that enriches students, that keeps them engaged and wanting them to be in school.
Thank you. Mr. Nye?
Answer is no problem. If there is one, we can adjust it. The problem is the career ladder has to be better funded, and teachers are getting 8 to 10% below what they were getting if you adjust it for cost of living. My mom was a teacher. I taught as an adjunct in law school and up at ISU. The point is to teach on a lifetime of learning and the desire to learn. And I think this is a way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire?
Well, I want to make sure that the people on the panel aren't mistaking Common Core for excessive testing in order to assure how the kids are doing and how the teachers are doing. There's a huge difference between those two issues. Nobody wants to see excessive testing forcing teachers to do things that are not successful. But let me say this. Let's look at the people that support Common Core, including Governor Otter and the Task Force for Education in Idaho. That's all part of the plan. And the reason why it is because Common Core does two things that I think are very, very complementary. It's not whether you learn a specific item at a specific time. It teaches academic rigor, the ability to stay on task until it is completed. And the next thing is, it teaches you to use your imagination to gather information from other sources, other locations, other ideas, and you put them together to solve problems. That's what Common Core is about. And that is a very, very good thing for our education. Common Core, from what I can gather with teachers that I've talked to, they're very happy about it because one thing it does is it provides a uniform system of education all through the educational program.
Any additional comments? Then we will move next to Mr. Carta. Please comment on refusing federal tax dollars paid by Idahoans for medical insurance for full-time workers who do not earn enough to get help from the Affordable Care Act.
I'm here because of medical compensation, or the Radiation Compensation Act, for people to get it. There are people who are running for office here, Mr. Savelle, who has helped people get the compensation here. Why aren't people told? Why don't people help? Federal monies. Money's available for people in our community. You want to suffer with cancer? I guess you're free to do it. But, you know, I worked for the Down Wonders years ago. I am supportive of any money, especially if it's due, which shouldn't even necessarily have to come from the government. I mean, we have an FMC corporation that made hundreds of billions of dollars in this community. But at least in this area, they should play a big part of the bill. In terms of wasting federal monies, no, I mean, let's put the medical things here. We have a nursing program, a good medical health issue. That's what we need to build upon. If we're going to bring the materials, the equipment down here, we can save lives here, like the whole body count cave that the Department of Energy has. People would be lined up to get tested.
Mr. Katsoumides?
Yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum to accept that money when we know the federal government is very close to $20 trillion in debt. We can't sustain the printing of money and the spending of money. Eventually, things will collapse. We've seen this throughout history, if you're students of history. What we need to do, and I've talked to quite a few folks in the insurance industry and whatnot, we need to have something lower cost available and provided other access to medical care other than an insurance policy that you're required to buy, and if you don't, you get fined for it. And the Medicare and the Medicaid gap is a huge problem for Idahoans. Mr. Savelle mentioned that earlier tonight. 78,000, closer to 80,000 actually is the number of people who can't afford insurance. Can the rest of us pay for it? I don't know. Mr. Carter brings up a point. We had a company here making a tremendous amount of money. They're gone, and they're trying to shirk a lot of their responsibilities.
Thank you. Mr. Nye?
In 3 words, close the gap. We've been kicking this can down the road too long, too many committees. The surprising thing to me is for every dollar in Idaho that we send to Washington, D.C. in our taxes, every dollar, we get back about $1.44 already. Over 30 states, I think, have picked up the Affordable Care Act. So in 3 words, I think it's about time that we close the gap. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire?
I'm going to say something that I think Margaret Gagnon will recognize. It's a term called ALICE, a term that was started by the United Way as a result of an economic study they did, and it talks about the people that are in the gap. Asset limited, income constrained, and employed, but they don't have health insurance. Now, a lot of people seem to have the idea that these people that are in the gap, these 78,000 people, they're somehow lazy and they're not doing their fair share, and they really don't deserve that kind of help. But they're doing their fair share. The vast majority, 22% of the people in Idaho are ALICE, are defined as ALICE people. Now, they're hoping someday to get out of that conundrum. They'd like to get out of that gap, that area where they're not covered by Medicaid and they don't qualify for a tax subsidy. If we help them and protect them with health insurance, that gives them a chance to raise their standard of living and to get out of the gap. That's something that we all ought to be working for, and we ought to be hoping for. Everybody ought to be able to get decent health care, and the program that is suggested does just that.
Thank you. Mr. Manwaring?
So it's been mentioned a couple of times, especially in the prior panel, that we should just take the federal money. My concern is if we take the federal money, what's the consequence of that? Once we expand Medicaid in Idaho, there's no take-backs. We're going to have a population that now is dependent on us to take care of them. And I think the problem for me and for a lot of Idahoans is once we keep them covered, are we in, and the other thing that's kind of a misnomer is that they keep saying there's 78,000. Every state that's done this, it's been about at least twice that many that we're ended up covering. And so I don't think we're going to be getting out of covering them once we enable it. And so I think we need to carefully consider the tax implications of accepting federal funds and look for other ways that we can get everybody covered and have affordable health care in Idaho. And I don't have much time, but I'd love to talk more about that later.
Thank you. Mr. Carter, any additional comments?
I have one.
Oh.
Yeah, in my discussions with folks in the insurance industry, and it's been quite a few of them, there are a couple of states already that expanded the Medicaid coverage for their population base that's underserved. And what had happened to those states is they found out there were a few extra hoops in Obamacare, and they were denied the money that they were supposed to be getting that were promised. They had a big expansion, and now those states can't afford it. And you'll be seeing this in the news coming up shortly. So we have to find another way.
Any additional comments? This next question goes to Mr. Katsilometes. Do you support or oppose having the state of Idaho assume ownership of federal public lands?
I tend to support it insofar as a lot of the public land management by the federal government has not been successful, and they have a lot of pressures, mostly coming from Washington, D.C., on what they can and cannot do. And when you're out in Idaho, things are a little bit different than they are in Washington, D.C. We are here in Idaho, we enjoy the outdoors, and what has happened in a lot of instances is the federal lands are closed from a lot of activities, grazing and logging. There have been instances where things have been overgrazed and overlogged, but what has happened is they reduce all those activities, and then you have incredible amounts of fuels and fires. And that's what we've been experiencing in Idaho for the last 10 years. It's a problem. I think we know how to manage our public lands better, and I think we have a great opportunity to make those federal public lands, state public lands, and keep them public.
Thank you. Mr. Nye?
Margaret, this one is a no-brainer. Our Constitution in Idaho says we can't do it. And that's the way it is. As far as the rational basis, it can be argued, but we talked about this in the legislature last term, whether to set up a committee, with other states to look into this, and we voted no. I'm not giving legal advice, I'm just telling you what the Constitution says. So like I say, it's a non-starter. I also oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire?
Does anybody here know Lori Bell? Somebody does. Okay. How about Dave Pacioretty? Yeah, Lori is the district ranger. Dave Pacioretty is the director of the BLM for this area. Do you know how many candidates running for political office have actually gone and talked to them about the services provided by those two agencies in this area? One. And I'm the one that's talking to you about what they told me. When you provide services as broad as the BLM and the Forest Service provide for timbering, for logging, for mining, and for public use, you've got to have a big organization, and they've got to be pretty well funded in order to get all that done. And you know what? In all of southeastern Idaho, Dave Pacioretty and Lori tell me they don't really have any conflicts. Oh, sure, there's a few here and there, but they get along great with the people that they work with that do mining and do logging and do agriculture on it. The AUM unit charged for...
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Manwaring?
Thank you. So this is one where I think we can use an example of how Idaho has been a good example for the other states. When all the other states, not all of them, but many of them were trying to spend their way out of the recession, we were fiscally conservative and showed that we can be responsible in Idaho. I think we can take pieces of the federal land and see if we can do it and show the federal government that we know how to effectively manage it. I disagree that it's against Idaho's Constitution, and I'm also an attorney, so I'm not giving legal advice. But I think we can do that, and we can show that we can effectively manage those lands. It's a significant part of Idaho, and I know in one area in particular, the wildfire management, I think Idaho will do way better than the federal government.
Thank you. Mr. Karta?
Well, I did talk to Lori. I wish she had come cleaner on things. But I want to make it very clear, the contamination that's occurred out there in the Caribou National Forest is not the product of the National Forest Service. That material did not originate from the Forest Service. That material originated most likely from Pocatello, and that's what we're investigating right now, the actual source of the materials. Now, you don't want to be breathing to death. We put out warnings for the Forest Service. We're putting out warnings for hunters and trappers and fishermen and visitors and trying to make, basically contact people who've been exposed to this materials. But it comes from do not tell, and that comes from our state and local level. And that's where the problem lies. So would I trust the federal government? No, but I trust the people that work for them, at least the ones on the lower levels, because that's what they're guided with. But politicians making a local buck, that's why we have it. Now we have this serious problem.
Thank you.
Contaminating our eastern Idaho.
Any additional comments?
Yes. Two, I agree with Mr. Manwaring. I don't think that's an issue whether it's constitutionally prohibited or not. We can always amend the state constitution. It's been done before, we can do it again. Number two, if you want an example of management of forests, I was fortunate enough to be faced with this problem on some private lands that I managed years ago, back in 1990 and 91. And we had a select cut, very limited logging operation to thin the forest when we had a drought problem.
Thank you. Any other additional?
Yeah, I'd like to comment. We have a Forest Service and BLM office, two of them, Pocatello, Preston, some in Malad, Salmon, Chalice, Twin Falls, Burley. Do you know how many State Department of Lands offices there are in the state of Idaho? There are two. One in Boise and one in Coeur d'Alene. Now you tell me how the state proposes to take over the responsibility of the federal government managing our public lands with those miserly resources.
Any additional? Then we will move to the next question. First to Mr. Nye. Would you work to increase revenues to better fund schools by eliminating some sales tax exemptions?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire? Okay, Mr. McGuire.
I started off with this discussion complimenting the League of Women Voters because they are a courageous group, and they really have started a great discussion with respect to tax fairness, careful analysis to tax benefits at special interest group and how we should vet them and how we should use that money to fund education. You can't just say, well, we need to raise teacher salaries, and so let's add taxes. Some people are not going to go for that. They're going to want to know if there's another way to raise revenues for our educational system, which it sorely needs right now. And I think the League of Women Voters has a great idea, and one that we all need to start talking about. Let's get rid of exemptions in the tax code that unfairly penalize the rest of us who are paying. And we could pay less if we would do that. So yes, I would do that.
Thank you. Mr. Manwaring?
So most exemptions, and I would carefully look at every exemption and see if it seems like it's appropriate, but every exemption that I'm aware of has been put there to promote economic development. And the reason they keep bringing this up is because they're talking about, and my opponents just mentioned, education. We need more funding for education. But Idaho, if you consider what's between K through 12 and college education, 60% of the general fund is going towards education. The problem is not funding, it's what we're doing with our dollars and then making sure those dollars are spent effectively and wisely. So, it's kind of a disguise for raising taxes. It is a different way for them to get more education funding.
Thank you. Mr. Carton?
Well, I'm concerned about education in the sense that, we waste our money. I agree. I agree with anybody who has that position. There are ways, I mentioned some, project learning. There's a lot of things we're starting to try to use, but they're limited and they have their drawbacks, and that's computer education, video education, those types of techniques. But, we don't have to spend the money we do. But because education is one of the largest employers on the planet, that's a lot of jobs people ain't going to have. Because I'm a facilitator of learning. I don't sit up there and lecture. I bring people into groups. I go visit them. I talk with them. I share them, how their projects are going. I just love the dynamics. They just are so passionate, they sometimes will interfere with their classroom because they so much want to work on their projects. The self-motion, the child-oriented, the student-oriented projects. So money, how it's used, and it's not used very well.
Mr. Katsilometes.
I would tend to support elimination of some of the sales tax exemptions if we were going to rewrite the entire tax code, and I think we need to. It is overcomplicated, both at the federal level, especially at the state level, what we're talking about here. The income tax code, the sales tax code, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, go ahead, especially when you have insomnia, because it will put you to sleep. It is awful. And we try to tax all these little different things here and come up with a special rule, and then we try to have a special exemption, and the lobbyists come in. It's a mess. It needs to be simplified and straightened out. And yes, I would support those exemptions if we simplified the code.
Thank you. Any additional comment?
Well, Margaret, I'm on the Revenue and Tax Committee, and we've gone through all this, and that's why I said yes, and I agree that no problem in cutting the exemptions.
Any additional comments? Then we will move on to questions starting with Mr. McGuire. Do you support amending the Idaho Human Rights Act to add the words sexual orientation and gender identity?
I've talked about this with a lot of people, and I think maybe this is the best way to answer it. What would Pocatello be like if all our gay friends and all our lesbian friends left town tonight? What would Pocatello be like? It would be a whole lot poorer. It'd be poor from the theater point of view, theatrics and drama. It'd be poor from our educational system. It'd be poor from our retail system. They are members of our community, and I'm sure that a lot of you know gays and lesbians, and I'm sure that you've made good friends with them because they're fun, they're lively, they're imaginative, they help our community. Well, if you want to keep them in your community, you got to make them feel welcome. And one way you make them feel welcome is you get rid of discrimination. You say, yes, you are our friends, and no, we're not going to let people discriminate against you on the basis of your sexual orientation or your gender. I don't know of anybody that can actually say that they have been physically injured, assaulted, harmed, bothered by someone just because of their sexual orientation.
Thank you.
It simply has not happened.
Mr. Manwaring?
I would consider it, but I don't think the current Idaho Human Rights Act is discriminatory.
Thank you. Mr. Carta?
It's not necessarily a question of gay or whatever you want to call people of alternative lifestyles. It's an issue of rights. It doesn't matter if it's who speaks out. Yes, that group spoke out, and then they got penalized for it. Anybody who speaks out in this community will get penalized from it, get banned from everywhere, get banned from the schools, get banned from the city of Pocatello, even the police station and the libraries. Banned. Speaking out is our problem. It's our rights here. And the state legislature went when nobody was looking and took our basically right of public initiative to make our laws, to circumvent the legislature, and they made it so we can only do it every other year from what used to be 4 times a year. That's our right of public initiative. A right to say, you have screwed up enough, legislature. We want to go around you and let us make our own laws.
Thank you. Mr. Katsilometes?
I would have to agree with Mr. Carter. That's one way to do it. And I have to agree with Mr. Manwaring. I don't think the way the law is written is discriminatory. I'm opposed to the idea of giving every group or every person. It is inherently discriminatory to start dividing up people in certain ways and certain aspects. We have to accept all the people for whatever they are and be kind and courteous and whatnot. And I am not in favor of special rules for special people of any kind. I think we're all people, and we have something in our Constitution called equal protection. That ought to be enough.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Knight?
Oh, thanks to the league and for this question. Add the words should happen. As an elected official, and I support it. As an elected official now, my job is to represent my district and my state. My district is Pocatello. Pocatello has spoken on this. It's the law by ordinance in Pocatello not to discriminate. And I would uphold that and support the add the words question.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
Yeah, I just have one because I got to speak for Gary Kerness. A lot of people, if it wasn't for the Pocatello Valley Voice, would not know anything that's going on. I am his editor. Okay, he is capable of writing himself, but he dictates into a phone, and we basically publish the information. Yes, he is very good at law, very good at the rights, and that's what he's doing, trying to help people in this community. But again, he's standing up for rights, especially of the elderly and the disadvantaged. And what happens in our state, not just here, because I'm connected all over the state with people with those issues.
Thank you. Any additional comments? We will move then to closing remarks, and we will start with Mr. Manwaring.
Thank you, and thanks again to the League of Women Voters and to the panel. I appreciate everybody here tonight and everybody that may be watching on television. I believe that there's many of us here tonight and around the country that are concerned with the leadership that we have. At the presidential level right now and in the race, that's a prime example of some of the struggles that we're having in making decisions in our leadership. I think now more than ever, it's a time for us to thoughtfully consider who we are electing and sending and representing us. And what we can do is elect good local people that we know and we know will represent our values. And in Idaho, we still have the ability to do that. As an attorney and small business owner, I understand the issues that are facing us in Idaho. I understand the importance of education and encouraging small business, things that help small business and help all of us have good access to affordable health care.
Thank you.
So I'm ready to lead. Appreciate your vote.
Mr. Kartzel?
Well, let me just give a couple of quotes here to relate to things that I deal with here. If we make it legal, it is not unethical. Therefore, it's not unethical because it's legal. That's the premise of which a lot of people, Mr. Nye and his associates working in this community and the state legislature operates under. Otherwise, uranium is uranium, no matter how small, deadly and deathly for us all. And sometimes you just need to hear what it sounds like. Just as a reminder, because you live with it. Living with uranium, Pocatello Valley. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Women's League for having me.
Thank you. Mr. Katsoumides?
Again, folks, running for the Idaho State Senate, District 29, and agree with Mr. Manwaring, it's time for some new leadership and new ideas and new problem-solving strategies. And we've got a system in a lot of respects that's just broken. It needs repair. We need to tackle a lot of problems and have new ideas. And if I'm elected as a state senator, I will be in the majority and have a greater opportunity to serve the people of Pocatello, Chubbuck, and parts of Bannock County in District 29. And I would appreciate your vote and hope to serve you very well and speak with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nye?
Thanks, Margaret, and the League. This has been a good group, a good discussion. But in closing, I'd like to say that public service is an honor. I ask to be your voice to be reelected to the Idaho legislature as your senator. I've been working to help Pocatello and represent people here all my life. I'd like to continue. I pledge to use my best efforts to do what's right. As they say, experience does matter, and I ask for your support and your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. McGuire?
I started working when I was 11 years old, had a newspaper route. I was so small when I started that after I would load the bags, front and back, you remember those bags that people had, newspaper boys had, I had to actually get on the ground and sit down and slide underneath it and then stand up to waddle my way down the street. And on Sunday, I had to take 2 loads because it was simply too much for me. I've been working ever since. And I've been working for Pocatello in a lot of capacities as a citizen here. And if I get elected to the legislature, I fully intend to continue to work hard for Idaho State University, for Pocatello, for people who need insurance coverage, for our educational system, which really does need some help right now, financial help. Because like I say, we've got teachers leaving faster than we can train them, and we've got to solve that problem, not today, not next week, and not in some 5-year plan. We've got to go to work to solve that problem now. I'll go to work just like I did when I was 11 years old, and I'll keep going until we solve these problems.
Thank you. Thank you all for your participation. Please vote on Tuesday, November 8th between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. You can either bring government-issued photo ID or request to sign a personal identification affidavit. Early walk-in voting is from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday until November 4th. We have a new location. It's next to the Bannock County Courthouse in the old jail at 141 North 6th Street. If you're not registered yet to vote, you can do that when you go to vote on the 8th or when voting early. And we encourage you to inform yourselves. The Secretary of State's office is mailing a voter information pamphlet to everyone, regardless of whether you're registered or not. And this year, you'll have a chance to learn about the constitutional amendment HJR 5, which is on the ballot to add legislative review of state agencies' rules. If you would like to inform yourself more, go to the Secretary of State's website or idahovotes.gov. You can also look on Facebook on the League's webpage or Facebook page, and there are forms on the table to get involved with the League. We hope you leave tonight better informed on the upcoming election. Thank you all.